Alina, they're accusing you of stealing money from the house, they're even talking about divorce. The message from my father-in-law made me pause, my fingers tightening around my phone. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Jared had never once brought up divorce to me directly, and now they were trying to pin theft on me? How predictable. Walter had been the only decent person in that house. Now that he was gone, Jared and his mother were finally revealing their true selves. But they had no idea what was coming. My name is Alina, and I work remotely while also taking care of my father-in-law, Walter. In my in-laws' home, Walter had always been devoted to his work, but years of overexertion took their toll. A severe back injury left him unable to keep up, and his health deteriorated. Since my mother-in-law, Margaret, was too old to care for him alone, I agreed to move in with my husband, Jared, to help. The house belonged to Walter's family for generations, an expansive, single-story home. Maybe it was the luxury of space, but both Margaret and Jared carried themselves with an air of entitlement. Margaret, despite being a housewife, insisted she couldn't possibly live like an ordinary person. Jared, on the other hand, wore their lifestyle like a badge of honor, as if wealth and status were his birthright rather than something to be earned. Over time, I realized how condescending they could be. Still, since they at least managed to contribute enough to justify their expensive habits, I kept my opinions to myself. Walter, however, seemed to see things the way I did, but as his condition worsened, his ability to support the household financially faded. He confided in me that he was struggling, burdened by the weight of it all. Given Margaret and Jared's attitudes, it wasn't the kind of household where open discussions about money were welcome. Understanding his predicament, I chose to be the family's pillar, caring for Walter while managing my remote work. Margaret made no adjustments to her lifestyle. She left the responsibility of caregiving entirely to me, carrying on with her daily routines, keeping up with housework at her convenience, and going on outings with friends as if nothing had changed. Walter often apologized. Alina, I'm sorry to trouble you like this. If it weren't for my back injury, I wouldn't be such a burden. Please don't say that. I always reassured him. You've given so much to this family. It's time for you to rest. He would smile, relieved, but the years of overwork had already taken their toll. His health continued to decline. Then, during one of our hospital visits, we received devastating news. Walter had cancer. Margaret and Jared's reaction was telling. Instead of concern, they bombarded him with questions about how much treatment would cost and how long he had left to live. I was stunned by their sudden interest in him, especially considering how indifferent they had been before. One day, while Jared was at work and Margaret was out with friends, Walter called me into his room. I have a feeling they're only being nice to me because they're already calculating their inheritance. They'll act pleasant enough to keep me in good spirits, but deep down, they're only thinking about what I'll leave behind. His words soon proved true. Margaret and Jared started to resent the bond Walter and I shared. They made subtle, cutting remarks that soon became outright accusations. One evening at dinner, Margaret turned to Jared with a smirk. Why is my daughter-in-law home all day, yet she doesn't lift a finger around the house? Jared scoffed. Who knows? She quit her job behind my back and does nothing but sit around all day. Maybe she's after Dad's money. They were saying this right in front of me. But I am working, I interjected. Margaret waved a dismissive hand. Don't be ridiculous. You haven't earned a cent since moving in. Stop lying. The only reason we live comfortably is because Jared works hard every day. Meanwhile, you just laze around the house. They had never even bothered to check what I did. Deciding it wasn't worth the fight, I silently picked up my dinner tray, intending to eat in Walter's room, but before I could leave, Margaret yanked the tray from my hands. I won't let a woman like you, who's only after my husband's money, serve his food, she snapped. I'll do it myself. She knew full well that I had been carefully preparing Walter's meals according to his dietary needs, yet she acted like my efforts were non-existent. Worse, she took the credit for them. I swallowed my frustration. Arguing would accomplish nothing, especially in front of Walter. Forcing a small nod, I murmured, please, go ahead. Over time, they escalated their hostility. They began preventing me from visiting Walter when he was hospitalized, most likely fearing he might leave something to me in his will. Then, they started spreading lies, telling everyone that I had abandoned my caregiving responsibilities, despite the truth being the complete opposite. Walter confided in me over the phone. I try to nod along when they criticize you so they won't say anything worse. I don't want them to make things even harder for you. And then, out of the blue, I received the text from him. Alina, they're saying you took money from the house. They're even bringing up divorce. I let out a soft, mirthless chuckle. Jared had never confronted me about divorce directly, nor had he made any attempt to kick me out. Did they really think I'd be scared off by baseless accusations? If anything, this only confirmed their fears. They must have worried that if they truly pushed me away, I'd gain my independence, and worse, that Walter would take my side. Despite their pettiness, I continued working and kept in touch with Walter whenever I could, but 6 months later, he passed away. Grief weighed heavily on me, but I focused on making the funeral arrangements as he had wished. Jared and Margaret, unsurprisingly, offered no help. I took care of everything alone. Then, about a week after the funeral, something unexpected happened. While I was working, Jared and Margaret suddenly stormed into my room, something they had never done before. Startled, I quickly saved my work and turned off my computer. "What's going on?" I asked, wary of their expressions. Margaret's eyes burned with accusation. "Drop the act. We know you've been stealing household money, and I wouldn't be surprised if you took some from Walter, too." I stared at her, speechless. Jared's face twisted in anger. "You got close to my dad, using your youth to manipulate him into giving you money, betraying me, your own husband." His accusation was sickening. My bond with Walter had been genuine. I had never taken a dime from him. There had to be some kind of misunderstanding. I protested, but they didn't believe a word I said. Without hesitation, they started shoving my belongings into boxes, disregarding my protests. "Stop this, just listen to me for a second," I pleaded. Jared, however, shoved a stack of papers into my hands and barked, "There's nothing to discuss. I've already prepared everything. Sign these divorce papers and file them immediately. You need to leave." At last, everything clicked. The only reason they hadn't divorced me sooner was that they feared I would visit Walter freely if I were no longer tied to this house. But now that he was gone, they had no reason to keep me around. Margaret hurled my clothes at me. "You're worthless, lazy, get out of my house." Jared piled on, calling me a freeloader and shoving a pen into my hands. After enduring their cruelty for so long, I realized there was no point in staying. Without hesitation, I signed the divorce papers. "Fine, I'll leave," I said, my voice steady. "I'll pack my things myself, don't bother helping." Looking immensely satisfied, Jared and Margaret turned on their heels and left the room. I wasted no time finding a new place, packing up my things, and walking away from that toxic house forever. After submitting the divorce paperwork, I sent them a quick notification. Their only response? Sheer relief that I was finally out of their lives. But deep down, I knew they'd soon realize how difficult life would be without me. Less than a month later, while I was working, Jared's name flashed on my phone screen. I ignored the call. Moments later, an email arrived. "Hey, all our money is gone. You must have stolen it." The accusation was laughable. Walter had always kept the household finances secure, and there was no secret stash of cash just lying around. If Jared and Margaret couldn't find anything, it was simply because there was nothing left to find. I replied calmly, suggesting we could discuss everything during the inheritance proceedings. Strangely, Jared never responded. Clearly, he had forgotten that Walter's estate would have to be settled formally. Sure enough, a few weeks later, I received an official notice requesting my presence for the reading of Walter's will. Returning to my former in-laws' house felt strange, given that Jared and I were no longer married. When I arrived, Margaret and Jared were already seated, tension thick in the air. A man in a suit, the executor, began reading Walter's final wishes. The moment the words left his lips, Jared and Margaret turned deathly pale. Walter had left the majority of his estate to me. Margaret inherited the house, while Jared received whatever cash remained. Margaret erupted, "This is ridiculous. Why would some outsider get the bulk of the inheritance? I was his wife, Jared is his son, she's nothing to us." Her outburst startled even the lawyer. Jared glared at me, his face contorted with fury. "This is insane. You must have tricked him into this. There's no way Dad would willingly leave everything to you." I had no interest in arguing, but there was something I had been wanting to ask for a long time. "By the way," I said, leveling a calm gaze at Jared, "why did you ever assume I was taking money from your father?" Jared scoffed, "Don't try to change the subject, but if you must know, Dad mumbled something about money every month before he passed. He was barely conscious, but it was obvious he meant that he had been giving you an allowance, or lending you money, right?" At that moment, I understood everything. "Actually, it's the opposite," I corrected. I explained that I had been the one contributing a significant amount, roughly $5,500 per month, to sustain the household since Walter could no longer do so. Meanwhile, neither Jared nor Margaret had contributed a single cent. Walter had felt guilty for taking my money, constantly apologizing. That was likely what he had been referring to in his final days. Margaret's mouth fell open. $5,500 a month? But, how? You didn't have a job. I was working from home, I reminded her. We discussed this before I moved in, or did you just never listen? Judging by their stunned expressions, it was clear they had never even considered the possibility that I had been supporting them all along. Suddenly, Jared's demeanor shifted. Then, let's start over, he said, his voice suddenly soft. You and me, I only pushed for a divorce because I thought you were a freeloader. You probably signed the papers out of shock and hurt, but now that I know the truth, there's no reason for us to stay apart. You love me, don't you? You must have hated being separated. Let's fix this. Come back home. I blinked at him, utterly dumbfounded. Why on earth would I go back? I said coolly. I only stayed in that house because I cared about your father. I have nothing left for you or your mother, just unpleasant memories. The two of you treated me like dirt. Why would I ever support people who despised me? Jared's face fell. So, your feelings for me are gone? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Long gone, I confirmed. He looked absolutely shattered, as if he had genuinely believed I still cared for him. It had never crossed his mind that plotting with his mother to throw me out could extinguish whatever affection I once had. Meanwhile, Margaret, who had to be restrained by the executor, had finally grasped the reality of her situation. With only the house and a dwindling sum of money, she would have to scrape by on Jared's meager salary of roughly $2,000 a month, hardly enough to maintain her extravagant lifestyle. That's impossible, she stammered. I had no intention of helping them. Without a shred of sympathy left, I turned my back on them and walked away. From that day forward, I cut off all contact. I blocked their numbers, changed my address, and made sure they would never be able to reach me again. But they didn't give up easily. Not long after, I heard from my mother that Jared and Margaret had shown up at my parents' house, demanding to see me. Bring Alina out now, Jared had shouted. Even if we're divorced, she's still my wife. That means her money belongs to me. If you don't hand her over, there will be consequences. Terrified, my parents immediately called the police. In an astonishing turn of events, Jared and Margaret lost control and lashed out at the officers, physically assaulting them. As a result, they were arrested on the spot. Later, I found out they had sold their grand home and moved into a cramped, run-down apartment. Yet, despite their dire situation, they continued their lavish spending habits, spiraling further into financial ruin. In the end, their desperation led them to crime, shoplifting food from grocery stores, scamming people, and getting into even deeper trouble. Fearing that they might try to target me again, I took every precaution to protect myself. Eventually, word reached me that both of them had been sentenced to prison. If they ever get out, I won't be around to find out. I've ensured that my location, contact details, and every aspect of my life remain a mystery to them. My parents, eager for a fresh start, decided to retire somewhere remote, making it impossible for Jared or Margaret to track them down. Walter's kindness will always have a place in my heart. As for Jared and Margaret, they sealed their own fate. And I have no intention of ever looking back. Thanks for watching, see you in the next video, stay tuned.